Dark Souls 1 is the game that started a trilogy that defined the Souls-like genre. Yes, Demon Souls came out before it, but I feel like Dark Souls is what really kicked everything off. Unfortunately, I never got around to playing any of the Souls games when they originally released, so I never understood all the hype surrounding them. The only game I played was Bloodborne, which I plan on revisiting, but other than that, I consider myself a complete newbie to the Souls series. Regardless, I dove into Dark Souls 1 and what I experienced was a mix of joy and complete soul-crushing torture. I'm not going to pretend to act like I know a whole lot about this game's story, and if you played any Souls-like game before, then you already know that there is story, but the way it's told can make it a bit hard to comprehend. To put it simply, you go on a journey to preserve the Age of Fire or bring in an Age of Darkness. You start out just having to ring 2 bells, which seemed really simple on the surface, but I should have known better that it would turn out to be really difficult. By the end of the story, you may not understand what you just did, but it's up to you to read the dialogue from the characters you meet over the course of the game. There's lore spread out all over the game and it's pretty much there for you to go and find it. It's your choice to find it or not find it, but your understanding of everything in Dark Souls definitely depends on the information you find, because the cutscenes by themselves aren't enough. Either way, there's enough told to the player to give you the information necessary to comprehend the plot. Now to the most popular aspect of a Souls game, the gameplay. The gameplay in Dark Souls 1 is definitely what gives this game the reputation that it has. Actually, when I first started, I didn't progress much because I was constantly redoing my builds. I went from Mage to Dex, back to Mage to Pyro, and then finally got to a compromise of using both Strength and Pyro. If you're watching this video, then you probably already know how builds work. You have a bunch of stats that seem overwhelming when you first look at them, and these include Vitality, Endurance, Strength, Dexterity, etc. All of these can be increased by acquiring the souls from your enemies and using them on these stats. But what I loved about this game is how you can truly craft a build that is unique to you and your playstyle. There really is no right way to create your character. So if you want to make a fast ninja type of build, you might want to level up Dexterity. While on the other hand, if you're like me, you may want to level up Strength and use an Unga Bunga weapon to just bop the enemies. Regardless of what build you want to make for your character, you're able to craft an experience that aligns with how you want to play the game. Personally, I struggled so much with my build because I wasn't sure how I wanted to play. When I played Bloodborne, I didn't know anything about builds but ended up doing a Dex build anyways. However, in Dark Souls, I tried that and it didn't feel the same. It felt like I was poking the enemies with a stick. It was at that moment when I made the decision to switch to the Strength build I mentioned earlier. The weapons in Dark Souls are definitely one of the highlights. There is an absurd amount to choose from, all with different stats meant for different builds. What's even better is when you run around the areas and stumble upon a powerful weapon that makes your current weapon obsolete. Once I had my build in place, I ended up using the Dragon Tooth for the majority of the game. It isn't scaled the best with Strength, but it's insanely strong and does a lot of damage. After I reinforced it at the blacksmith, I was able to slam and stun a lot of the smaller enemies that you encounter. Add one of these heavy weapons to a solid set of armor and you become a literal tank. Your poise will increase and even bosses won't be able to knock you down. They'll just be able to knock you backwards. This is extremely useful in the fights because you don't always have to master their movements. You just have to block their attacks. To think that this method of playing the game can all start from what weapon you choose just shows the diversity this game has in terms of its gameplay. In my opinion, I would say use a weapon that scales well with the build that you have, so you get the most that you possibly can out of it. However, that brings me to my first critique of the game. The movement. It doesn't matter if you're wearing no armor or a whole suit of it, it just feels really slow and stagnant. Like when performing almost any movement, there's input lag and it makes it seem like you're going through quicksand. It's not a big deal when facing the slower moving enemies, but if you go against speedy enemies, you're going to be in for a tough time. On the other hand, if this was a gameplay design choice, then I get it. If the devs wanted Dark Souls to be slow, then I understand because it puts the pressure on the players to then adapt. It could be due to the game's age, but if the game was a bit faster paced, then the combat could have been even better. The exploration is an area of the game that I'm torn on. While I do love exploring and finding all this cool stuff, I absolutely hate how long it takes to find a boss or the bonfire. There were so many times that I got lost just trying to find out where to go. It was absurd. To make matters worse, you're still fighting enemies along the way as well. It's crazy because you can find the most insane items just by venturing out into some unknown places. There's no greater satisfaction than going to a new place, finding someone who can upgrade your pyromancy, and then all of a sudden you have access to a whole slew of new spells. It really does make the whole journey worth it. Even still, having to run through the same sections does get old after a while. There's nothing worse than being right by a bonfire and getting hit by an enemy that ends up killing you, or you fall off an edge that does it instead. Say what you want, skill issue, or get good bro, but I don't care. It does get annoying, even more so when you lose a bunch of souls. I think the environment in Dark Souls are all unique and different. Starting from Firelink Shrine, I had no idea of the type of areas I would encounter over the course of the game. From the church near the bell tower to the sewers infested with rats, each location was truly a pain in the ass. If I had to narrow it down to which locations were the absolute worst, it would be Blighttown, the sewers, and the Tomb of the Giants. And it's crazy because all three are bad for different reasons. Trying to reach the bottom of Blighttown was absolutely terrible, and then when you get down there, the entire floor is nothing but poison. So if you want any hopes of surviving, you're going to need plenty of purple moss clumps to heal you and stop the siphoning of your health. On top of managing that, you still have to deal with the enemies who, to nobody's surprise, can poison you as well. The sewers don't seem too bad, but once you get down there, it gets real dicey fast. Why, you might ask? It's because of these stupid frogs that lie at the bottom that can curse you if you get too close. This made the entire journey down there so much harder. Thankfully, you can buy heals that remove curses from this creepy lady merchant, but even still, it's a pain. And lastly, the Tomb of the Giants. Honestly, the enemies in this area aren't even that bad, but it's the fact that this area is in complete darkness is what makes it annoying. Yes, there's little light orbs that light your way, but you're still going to fall off the edge multiple times. On your first playthrough, there's absolutely no way that you're going to know exactly where the path is so you don't fall off. And it doesn't stop there, there's other areas that have just as bad of a design. It's crazy because the levels themselves are all enjoyable, but their design is so bad that they're also frustrating at the same time. Maybe because the layout is like a big maze, it hinders the exploration, but nonetheless, the areas in this game are memorable, but mostly for all the wrong reasons. Thankfully, the bosses made up for all the BS regarding the path you go to get there. Right from the beginning with the Asylum Demon, the boss fights were a challenge. However, I'm happy to say that I did not die against the Asylum Demon. It's the tutorial boss. Like, come on. But believe me, I took so many L's to a bunch of these bosses. And when I say this game is hard, it is very hard. If I had to say which boss I hated the most, it would definitely be the Capra Demon. Not only was this boss hard, I have no idea what the devs were smoking on when they designed this fight. You're stuck inside this super tight area with the demon doing giant swings constantly and two dogs chasing you all over the place. Since this is an early game fight, the difficulty spike is insane. It's almost impossible to try to kill the demon while the dogs are on you, all while not running into the walls. The only way I was able to beat this was by going up to the top corner and hurling fireballs from above. This is definitely cheap, but when the fight is so poorly designed, I felt as if I had no choice. You wouldn't believe how I felt when I looked up this fight after I beat it to find out that it's technically optional. I was absolutely sick. One of my favorite boss fights was the Great Wolf Sith. Simply for the fact that you're fighting a giant wolf with a sword is dope, but in the fun way because you have to memorize its attack patterns but also make sure you don't get too close because it has surprisingly long range. There's other great boss fights, but this wolf fight is one that stands out for me. But anyways, the variety in the bosses definitely are the shining star of this game. All of them differ in appearance, attacks, and location. There's no better feeling than encountering a boss and getting hit with an attack that you didn't see coming or something that's absolutely devastating. I think that's what makes Souls games so good, is the satisfaction that comes from killing these crazy bosses. It's almost like a drug, like a short hit of dopamine that took so long to get but was worth all the effort. That brings me to my next point, your actual approach and how you decide to get through the game. Especially in today's gaming climate, there's so much discourse over how you should play a Souls game. I know people who say you can't grind at all, can't use OP weapons, while others have told me that they use everything the game has to offer. Me personally, I'm with the latter, as I will use anything that's included in the game to beat these bosses. And I mean anything. If it's a weapon, I want it. If it's a farming spot or a glitch, let me see it. I'll take everything I can get because I want limitless options at my disposal when playing a Souls game. Now hold on a second before you say, bro, that's not how you play these games. You're actually trash. I don't care. You can level up drastically, find great weapons, and have a solid build, but still end up dying to the bosses. It really all comes down to skill and understanding how to kill each enemy. Once you know what you can dodge, can block, and where the openings are, then you stand a fighting chance. Unless you have a build that 1 or 2 shots an enemy, I wouldn't consider anybody actually OP, because in most boss fights I was still dying even after I increased my stats. To sum it up, I'm glad I played Dark Souls the way I wanted to, because it made the experience so much better. Using what's included in the game shouldn't be frowned upon, but if you'd like to further increase the difficulty in this game by restricting what you can and cannot use, then go right ahead, because I understand others love the challenge. Without a shadow of a doubt, my biggest gripe with Dark Souls is how the bonfires between bosses are so far from each other. Like if you die to a boss, you have to run an entire marathon in order to get back to the boss room. Most of the time you have tons of enemies in your path too, making the entire trek even more difficult. Add on the fact that you could accidentally jump off a ledge and die before getting there, the journey from bonfire to boss fight can be more annoying than the boss fight itself. I'll give you a perfect example. On your way to the second encounter with Sith the Scaleless, you have to leave a library, run across part of a forest, and then go through an entire cave just to get to it. While trying to get there, you have to discover paths that appear invisible but are actually walkable paths along with evading crystal demons. The entire sequence of getting to this boss is some of the worst design I may have ever encountered in my entire life playing video games. However, the boss fight was so much fun it ended up overshadowing a lot of that. If the boss fires were placed right outside the boss room door, then that would have been so much more helpful, saving you time and allowing you to get back to downloading the boss instead of dealing with more small fry. Lastly, an underrated aspect that I liked was that you could kill the NPCs that were scattered throughout each area. Like as you come across them, you can interact with them, maybe shop at their store, and then kill them. It added an underlying layer of choice to this game because if you killed them, they wouldn't respawn. So if you were BSing and decide to kill an NPC just for fun, it may end up doing more harm than good, because they could have been the only ones who give you a certain item needed to upgrade your weapon later in the game. Of course, you could look this information up ahead of time, but nobody's trying to look everything up for each portion of the game. Just having the freedom to make these boneheaded decisions added more consequence to a game that is already brutal. Overall, I think Dark Souls 1 gets in its own way. There's so much to like about this game that the gameplay gets addicting really fast. However, some of the gameplay choices in regards to level design make the game unbearable at times. If you decide to call this a skill issue or just bad game creation, it's up to you. But even with those issues, it didn't ruin my time with this title at all. It just made me rage. A lot. So for those reasons, I'm going to give this game an 8. The gameplay loop of killing enemies followed by an epic boss doesn't get old, but the journey to the actual boss does. If the levels were designed better, then the journey between bosses, which is the majority of the game, would be a lot more tolerable. Even still, this game is a classic and was a solid first entry for the Dark Souls trilogy. What did you think about Dark Souls 1? Have you played this, or do you not like Souls or Souls-like games? Let me know in the comment section below, and if you enjoyed this video, feel free to check out one of my other reviews right here.